Minister's tortuous, legalistic response to the Leader of the Opposition earlier on, I was reminded of Dennis Healy's first law of holes, that when in one, the best thing to do is to stop digging. Another international comparison of the position that the First Minister seems to find himself in today is the Watergate affair, and he'll remember that it wasn't the break-in that actually brought down Richard Nixon, but the attempted cover-up. The President in that case said that when the President does it, it's not illegal. Does the First Minister really want to go down in history as the tricky dicky of Welsh politics?
Well, this is the man who defends Enoch Powell. This is the man who defends Enoch Powell. He seeks to lecture us on morality. Have a good look at yourself is my response to that. No one suggests that anybody is above the law, but I'd be interested to know whether there's anything that I said with which he disagrees.
Well, if I were counsel for so in any legal action might be brought, I would provide a legal argument for it. But the subsection which the First Minister refers to states that, in relation to ministers' functions, or rather the letter states that Section 37, in relation to ministers' functions, must identify a function which is exercisable by the First Minister and Welsh ministers collectively. If the function in question is exercisable by the First Minister alone, Section 37 has no application. So what he's effectively saying is that if it's Welsh ministers together, they are scrutinisable in the way that Section 37 provides. But if it's the First Minister alone, he isn't. That seems to be a very perverse interpretation of a very clear section.
Well, I find it very strange, as somebody who stands here in First Minister's questions every week, and has missed very few, to suggest that somehow I'm afraid of scrutiny. But the law is the law, and the law has to be applied. Now, there is a difference of interpretation. There are two ways of resolving that interpretation, one of which it would be my preferred way, which I already outlined, the other one which is more formal. But I believe that there is a way of resolving this in order to provide members with more transparency and to provide government with the kind of comfort that it needs. I mean, I ask members in this chamber, I ask the leaders of parties in this chamber, if you were in a position where you had been given documents in confidence and you found yourself with a vote demanding those documents should be produced, what would your response be? You know, put yourself in the position of you want to be in government. Put yourself in the position of somebody who is leading a government. It's hugely important that there is clarity in this regard, and that clarity, I hope, can be developed working with the Commission and the presiding officer in the future.
Well, I'm sure the First Minister is also aware of subsection 6 of Section 37, which says that if the Assembly does pass a motion requiring the production of a document, a direction may be issued by the First Minister or the Government to direct the person at which that requirement is pointed not to comply with it. That, of course, would place the Government in a very embarrassing position, but it would protect against the legal consequences which the First Minister was adumbrating earlier on. And it would seem a very perverse outcome again in relation to what he said about how this would breach commercial confidentiality potentially, wide implications of what this is supposed to risk. If anything which the First Minister was dealing with would be gaggable or could be prevented from publication, but anything that any other minister does is perfectly open to scrutiny, whether it be in a court of law or in a court of public opinion or in this democratic assembly which represents the whole of the Welsh people.
No, there are two issues. Firstly, as to whether the First Minister's functions are actually part of the operation of Section 37, and secondly, the broader Pandora's box that has now been opened, which is what documents are releasable under Section 37. If all documents are releasable, I can't see how government can continue, bluntly. Is that bad? There has to be some limit. Surely the operation of the Data Protection Act, the operation of the Freedom of Information... See, I know the Tories haven't thought this far, but the operation of the Freedom of Information Act, they would not apply. They would not apply in these... There has to be some limit to this. At this moment in time, government cannot give a guarantee of confidentiality to anybody. And that is an interpretation that we can't clearly accept. I think it's in everyone's interest to get that clarity. Secondly, he only read out the first part of the subsection 6. Yes, it is possible for a direction to be issued that the person not comply with a notice, but then another person has to be specified that has to comply with the notice. It's not an absolute discretion. So have a look at the second part of the section, and it'll give you a good idea of how the subsection operates. yes, it is possible to direct that the person should not comply, but someone else has to be put in their place. So actually the discretion is not as absolute as the member describes.